Hello and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to dive deep into a subject that is absolutely crucial for our survival, our environment and ecology. At the very outset, I want to assure you that we are going to go nice and slowly, breaking down this massive topic systematically. Whether you want to brush up on the fundamental rules of nature or you're curious about India's specific conservation journey, you are absolutely in the right place. Let's get started. To make things easy to digest, we'll be proceeding topic-wise through 5 clear sections today: ecology basics, biodiversity in India, the protected area network, climate change and pollution, and finally, environmental laws. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, Ecology and Ecosystem Basics, the rules of nature. To truly understand ecology, we first need to get familiar with the language of nature. Let us clearly distinguish between two very important concepts: habitat and niche. You can think of an organism's habitat simply as its address. It is the actual physical place where it lives, like a tropical rainforest, a desert, or a freshwater lake. But its niche, well, that is its profession. A niche defines the organism's functional role in that ecosystem. It's about what it eats, how it hunts, and how it interacts with everything around it. And nature's quite strict about this. According to Gauss's law, two different species with the exact same niche cannot coexist indefinitely in the same habitat. One will eventually outcompete the other. Nature literally demands specialization. So within these habitats, how does energy actually move around? This brings us to a fascinating rule called Lindemann's 10% law. When you look at an ecological pyramid, this law explains exactly why our food chains rarely exceed 4 or 5 levels. You see, as energy moves from the producers at the bottom, like green plants, up to the herbivores, and then finally up to the top carnivores, a massive 90% of that energy is completely lost as heat, or it's used up in respiration at each and every step. Only a tiny 10% gets passed on to the next level. To put that into perspective, this is exactly why you need a vast, endless savanna of grass just to support a very small number of lions. Now, ecosystems are not just static backgrounds. They are dynamic, and they evolve over time through a process called ecological succession. It is very important to note the difference between the two main types here. Primary succession is incredibly slow. It starts on a completely bare, lifeless surface. Think of a brand new volcanic rock. Pioneer species, like lichens, have to literally break down the rock and build the soil over centuries. Secondary succession, on the other hand, is a much faster process. It kicks off on land that already had vegetation but was recently disturbed, maybe by a forest fire or a massive flood. Because the nutrient-rich soil is already there, nature bounces back and reclaims that land far more rapidly. Moving smoothly right along to Section 2, Biodiversity in India, our ecological wealth. You know, India is proudly recognized globally as a mega-diverse nation. Think about this for a second. We have just 2.4% of the world's land area, but we are home to nearly 8% of all the recorded species globally. That is huge. And it gets even more interesting because India actually touches 4 of the world's 36 biodiversity hotspots. These are the Eastern Himalayas, Indo-Burma, the Western Ghats in Sri Lanka, and Sundaland, which includes our Nicobar Islands. But what makes a place a hotspot? Well, an area must have an exceptionally high number of endemic plant species, meaning plants that are found nowhere else on planet Earth. But at the same time, it must have already suffered a severe loss of 70% or more of its original habitat. It's a measure of extreme biological wealth under extreme threat. To protect this immense natural wealth and guarantee our long-term environmental stability, India has established some very clear targets. Back in 1988, the National Forest Policy set a highly ambitious but absolutely necessary goal. The target? To maintain exactly 33% of our total geographical area under forest and tree cover. And in the more fragile hilly regions, this target is pushed even higher to 66%. It's a clear directive prioritizing our ecological security over short-term commercial exploitation. Let's move on to Section 3, the Protected Area Network, restoring the balance. Let us understand how we practically protect these spaces, topic-wise, starting with the Biosphere Reserve. This is an international designation under UNESCO, and it relies entirely on a brilliant system of zonation. Right in the middle, you have the core zone. Here, human activity is strictly banned. It's reserved for absolute undisturbed protection. But as we move outwards into the buffer zone, limited human use, like scientific research or ecotourism, is permitted. Finally, in the outermost area, the transition zone, human settlements and sustainable resource use are actively integrated into the landscape. It really is a masterclass in human-wildlife coexistence. Within these protected areas, we place a heavy focus on certain key animals. A perfect example is the majestic Royal Bengal tiger, our national animal, and the absolute focal point of Project Tiger, which was launched back in 1973. In ecology, the tiger acts as an umbrella species. This is a very clever conservation strategy. It means that by strictly protecting the vast, complex habitats that a top predator like the tiger requires, we are indirectly but completely throwing a protective umbrella over countless other smaller species that share that very same ecosystem. But of course, our forests on land are not our only priority. We simply cannot ignore our vital coastal ecosystems. Take the Sundarbans, for instance, which is the largest mangrove forest in the entire world. Mangroves are just an ecological marvel. Their unique tangled root systems act as a critical, safe nursery habitat for marine fish. But beyond that, they serve as a massive blue carbon sink, absorbing huge amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And on a very practical level, they stand as a physical wall, a natural shield that protects our coastlines against the sheer destruction of cyclones and tsunamis. This naturally leads us into Section 4, Climate Change and Pollution, the Threat to Balance. The enhanced greenhouse effect, which is largely driven by fossil fuels and rapid deforestation, is causing profound physical changes to our planet. One of the most visible and, frankly, alarming indicators of this global warming is glacial melt, especially up in the incredibly fragile Himalayan ecosystem. And let's be clear, this isn't just a matter of losing some beautiful ice caps. This melt directly and severely threatens the long-term water security for hundreds of millions of people downstream, who rely entirely on those glacier-fed rivers for their survival. Alongside the macro issue of climate change, we are battling severe localized pollution. Let's look at water pollution in our rivers. Scientists use two primary metrics here, BOD and COD. BOD stands for biochemical oxygen demand. This basically measures how much oxygen microbes need to naturally decompose organic waste in the water. COD, or chemical oxygen demand, goes a step further. It measures the oxygen required to chemically oxidize all the pollutants, organic and inorganic. So the takeaway here is quite simple but grim. Whenever you see a higher oxygen demand, whether it's BOD or COD, it always indicates a much more severe level of pollution. It simply means there is less dissolved oxygen left in the water for fish and aquatic life, which eventually creates totally lifeless dead zones. But we have to remember that India is not just sitting by as a passive victim in all of this. At the COP26 Climate Summit, India stepped up and announced its Panchamrit strategy. Panchamrit translates to 5 nectar elements, and these are some bold, highly ambitious targets. Slowly, over the next few years leading up to 2030, India aims to reach 500 gigawatts of non-fossil energy capacity. We plan to meet a full 50% of our energy requirements from renewables, slash projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons, and lower the overall carbon intensity of our economy by 45%. And the final, ultimate goal crowning the strategy, achieving net zero emissions by the year 2070. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Environmental Laws and Conservation, Global and Indian Action. Let's take a quick step back and systematically trace how global environmental milestones have evolved over time. It really all kicked off with the foundational Stockholm Conference in 1972. That summit sparked a wave of global cooperation, giving us the highly successful Montreal Protocol in 1987, which literally saved the ozone layer. After that, we saw the Kyoto Protocol in 1997 aimed at greenhouse gases, which paved the way for the historic 2015 Paris Agreement to limit global warming. And bringing us right up to the present, the 2022 Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework has set some massive targets, like protecting 30% of the Earth's land and sea by 2030. Now, within India, it's crucial to understand that these international promises are backed up by very robust domestic legislation. In 1972, the Wildlife Protection Act laid down the legal groundwork for our national parks and protected species. The Forest Conservation Act of 1980 stepped in to heavily restrict the diversion of forest lands for other uses. A major turning point was the Umbrella Environment Protection Act of 1986, which was enacted swiftly as a direct response to the tragic Bhopal gas disaster, giving the government much broader regulatory powers. And more recently, the 2010 National Green Tribunal Act created a specialized environmental court to ensure speedy environmental justice. This National Green Tribunal doesn't just hand out fines. It operates on some very strong, established legal doctrines. Chief among them is the polluter pays principle. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's a powerful legal mechanism ensuring that the enterprise or entity that actually causes the pollution is the one that bears the absolute financial cost of controlling that pollution and repairing the ecological damage. It enforces a standard of absolute liability. Basically, it guarantees that hazardous industries can not just pack up and walk away from the ecological and human damage they leave behind. And, we have to highlight that these strict legal frameworks and dedicated conservation efforts really do matter because they yield tangible, real-world results. Thanks to powerful acts like the Wildlife Protection Act and massive focused initiatives like Project Tiger, India today proudly hosts over 70% of the world's entire wild tiger population. Think about that. It is a monumental conservation success story, and it proves beyond a doubt that when policy is backed by science and strict law, it absolutely works. Looking ahead at the grand scale of global climate action, India's most defining, monumental commitment is undoubtedly its pledge to hit net zero carbon emissions by the year 2070. Reaching this is going to require an absolute, ground-up transformation of our entire energy grid, our heavy industries, and our transportation networks, shifting massively towards solar, wind, and cutting-edge green technologies. Which leaves us with a final, really critical question to ponder as we wrap up today. How successfully is India going to navigate this incredibly tightrope? On one hand, we have the urgent, undeniable developmental needs of over 1 billion citizens. On the other hand, we have this absolutely crucial, non-negotiable ecological commitment for 2070. The laws and the policies are firmly in place, but the stakes for our future literally could not be higher. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into our ecological balance sheet today. I truly hope going through this topic-wise has brought some solid clarity to your learning journey. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.